News of the Times. A ghost story without a ghost. The Chelsea Parlour murder of 1833. Welcome to News of the Times. In 1833, a 70-year-old Catherine Elms lived quietly in a tiny Chelsea flat. She was well-liked, friendly, and poor, with only a few modest possessions. But one night she was found brutally slaughtered, her face split open by repeated blows with a sword and a hatchet, her rooms ransacked, and yet not a single thing of value was missing. But the true puzzle: every door was locked and bolted, the shutters fastened, and the street door key lay untouched in the hallway. It was as if the killer had melted through the very walls. With no servants, no family at home, and her only lodger away, the killing defied sense. Who could have entered the sealed house? Was it a stranger with a secret grudge, or someone she trusted enough to let in before she locked up for the night? The murder horrified England, baffled investigators, and has remained an enduring locked room mystery for nearly 200 years. Join us as we reopen the case of Catherine Elms, the Chelsea flat murder, a riddle of senseless violence and Georgian fear that still chills the imagination today. And in today's end of episode further particulars, when a late-night stroll turns into a wrestling match with a glowing, red-eyed nothing, you know you've met the Tondu ghost. Wales, it seems, breeds a sturdier class of apparition. So, draw the curtains, keep the kettle close, and prepare to meet a midnight assailant who may not even exist, and yet somehow leaves bruises. Background: Catherine Elms lived a quiet, almost hidden life in 1830s Chelsea. At 70, she occupied two small rooms at 17 Wellesley Street, a modest house whose rent was paid by a distant relative. Long ago, she had kept a small school in Smith Lane, and family whispers hinted at blue blood. Some even claimed a distinguished earl was her uncle. Yet, whatever her birthright, the present was starkly different. She was poor enough to have her taxes forgiven, and lived chiefly from the few shillings brought in by lodgers. By all accounts, she was gentle and well-liked, a woman of friendly habits and steady routine. Her pleasures were small: a nightly half-pint of beer fetched from the Wellesley Arms, a quiet evening at home, and her visitors were few. On the night of May 2nd, 1833, her only tenant, a young woman known as Mrs. Mortimer, was away with her children. Catherine closed up the house itself, bolting the back door and fastening the shutters, and prepared for bed. By Saturday morning, May 4th, 1833, Wellesley Street in Chelsea, London, had grown uneasy. Neighbours noticed the shutters still drawn, the door unopened, and not a sound within. At first they told themselves she was merely unwell or visiting friends. By afternoon, unease hardened into dread. When a constable finally climbed a ladder and forced his way through an upstairs window, the faint light revealed a room in eerie disarray. Bedclothes flung aside, cupboards yanked open, drawers gaping like silent witnesses. Then came the real horror. What they found, as recorded by the papers of May 1833, was almost beyond belief. From the Illustrated Police News, May 1833. the barbarous murder of an aged woman. On Saturday the 4th of May, 1833, a barbarous murder was discovered to have been committed on an aged female named Catherine Elms, who resided at 17 Wellesley Street in Chelsea. The deceased, who was about 70 years of age, at one time kept a school in Smith Lane, Chelsea, and on giving this up, she went to reside at the above-mentioned address. Her rent was paid by a relative, and her principal sustenance was derived from lodgers to whom she let part of the house. Her poverty was so great that she had been compelled to apply to the parochial authorities to be released from the payment of taxes, a request which was complied with. She was believed to have been related to a very good family, a venerable and distinguished Earl of being generally supposed to be her uncle. At the time of the murder, the only persons occupying a part of her house were a woman named Mortimer and her 3 children, who rented the room on the 2nd floor immediately over the apartment in which the deceased slept. But that person and her children had been staying at the house of another person since the previous Wednesday, May the 1st. On the Thursday night, the deceased went to the Wellesley Arms, the corner of Wellesley Street, for half a pint of beer, with which she returned. On the following day, the house was not open, but the circumstance did not at all at that time excite much interest. Bedroom in great confusion. On Saturday, however, as the house still remained closed, the neighbours became alarmed and commenced to institute an inquiry. A Mrs. Exley, who resided at 16 Wellesley Street, waited upon Mr. Dorking of Blacklands Lane, at whose house the deceased was in the habit of visiting, but he was quite unable to account for her absence. He proceeded to Wellesley Street, where he was met by Mr. Cole, the landlord of the premises, and it was then determined that the house should be entered. Police Constable Hughes was sent for, and he obtained a ladder which he placed to the back window of the 1st floor and entered the bedroom of the deceased. He did not observe the body as the window shutters were closed, but perceiving in the faint light which struggled through the slats that the room was in a very great confusion, he instantly proceeded downstairs and admitted Mr. Cole and Mr. Dorking and several others. They proceeded to the apartment, and on Hughes's opening the shutters, a horrible sight was revealed. Surrounded by a pool of blood, the deceased was lying on the floor face downwards, surrounded by a pool of blood. Her feet were on the hearthrug and her head behind the door. Hughes raised her from the floor, and it was then discovered that some inhumane monster had inflicted a most dreadful gash over the left eye. A second stroke, evidently with the same weapon, divided the upper part of the nose, cut in two the ball of the left eye, and severely wounded the other. Determined to completely extinguish the life of his victim, the murderer had then plunged a knife into the poor old woman's throat, and drawing it from side to side, divided the windpipe and caused immediate death. It appeared that the deceased was in the act of stepping into bed when this attack was made upon her. Her lamp stood in the fender, and it was supposed that the deceased had just placed it there and was in the act of rising from the ground when she received the blow on the forehead. 2 of her teeth were found on the rug. Her clothes were turned up as high as her knees, and her pocket, which was emptied of its contents, appeared to have been drawn through the pocket hole and pushed back in a clumsy manner. Her cap and tippet appeared also had been taken off and were found in the blood on the floor. A careful search was made in the room, but no knife or other instrument was found. It seemed that after the commission of this terrible deed, a most careful examination was made of the premises by the murderer. The bedclothes had been taken off, some were found strewn upon the floor, and some on the bedstead. Several boxes which were in the room, the cupboards, and in fact every place which could contain property appeared to have been searched, except a wine cooler in which was a flannel bag containing 4 old-fashioned silver salts, a pepper caster, a pair of sugar tongs, and 4 teaspoons. In the cupboard were 3 cruets with silver tops. In one of the boxes was a tablespoon. In the table drawer was a pair of silver spectacles. 3 other silver spoons lay in other parts of the room. In a writing desk were 6 pawn tickets for articles of plate. It is impossible to suppose that these things escaped the notice of the person who made the search, but it was therefore evident that plunder was not the object of the murderer. Trunk contents strewn about. Mrs. Mortimer's apartment was in a state of confusion. Trunks, boxes, and cupboards were opened and their contents strewn about the room, but nothing appeared to have been carried off. Several small valuable articles were found in the apartment. Among them was a gold mourning ring of a young person named Elms, who died in the year 1780. Nothing appeared to have been disturbed in the parlour except a workbox and a tea caddy, which had evidently been subject to a careful search. The back door was locked and bolted. The kitchen door in the front area was also locked and bolted. The window shutters were fastened, and everything indicated that the house had been closed by the deceased before she retired to her bedroom on the Thursday night. The street door was found on the single spring lock, and the key was found lying in the passage. The search of the house revealed more than blood and chaos. Mrs. Mortimer's upstairs rooms were every bit as overturned as Catherine's own. Trunks flung open, drawers emptied, and small valuables left oddly untouched. Yet every door and shutter was found locked and bolted from within. The street door secured by a spring lock, its key lying neatly in the passage. A true locked room puzzle. Then, as neighbours whispered in the street, the story took a stranger turn. The lodger herself, Mrs. Mortimer, suddenly appeared. Although she insisted she had been away for days, she pressed to enter the house at once, professing urgent concern for a few trifling belongings. To the officers on the scene, it was an unsettling performance. Here was a woman confronted with a home turned upside down and a landlady hacked almost beyond recognition, yet she showed almost no visible shock. Instead, she calmly answered questions and even volunteered to view the corpse, a composure remarkable, even suspicious, for a woman of her time. Arrested woman's dramatic declaration. Whilst the police were examining the house, Mrs. Mortimer arrived and insisted on being allowed to enter her apartment. Her request was at first refused, but as she appeared extremely anxious respecting some property which she said was in the room, she was allowed to go upstairs. Her property, which was very trifling, was found in the room, in the place where she had described. Several of the neighbours put a variety of questions to her respecting her family connection, which she was rather reluctant to answer. The consequence was that the inspector of police took her into custody. At the suggestion of some of the neighbours, she was taken into the room where the body lay, but she looked on the corpse without the slightest emotion. She also placed her hand upon the mangled corpse, and in a firm voice said, "So help me God, I am innocent of any participation in this murder." 4 days later, on Monday the 6th of May, the formal inquest began at the Wellesley Arms. The body of Catherine Elms had been left exactly as it had been found, congealed in a lake of blood, so dreadful in appearance that at first even the coroner could scarcely tell how many wounds she had suffered. Only after the surgeons carefully washed the corpse could the true scale of the attack be measured. What they revealed stunned even seasoned officials: a catalogue of blows and slashes so savage that it seemed less the work of a single killer than of some frenzied storm. The inquest. Surgeon describes the terrible wounds. The inquest was held at the Wellesley Arms Monday, May the 6th. The jury first viewed the body and then observed that they had seen the corpse just as it was first discovered, covered with blood. It was impossible to see the extent of the wounds, and for this purpose the surgeon was directed to have the body cleansed, in order that they could examine with minuteness the injuries and wounds inflicted on it. The medical evidence. Mr. Gaskell, a surgeon, stated that on the Saturday evening, May the 4th, he found the body of the deceased woman lying on the floor on her stomach, with her head a little to one side and having 5 wounds on the face and head. One was across the forehead, which divided the bridge of the nose and took a direction across the sockets of the eyes and cut deeply into the cheekbone. The third was given in a perpendicular direction, cutting deeply into the left temple and passing superficially over the left cheek. The fourth wound was across the mouth and lip, dividing the cheek entirely for 2 inches. It was by that wound that the teeth were knocked out. There was also a very large wound in the throat that divided the muscles, the windpipe, and the esophagus. The further extent of the wounds was only impeded by the bones at the back part of the neck. This wound had evidently been accomplished by 2 efforts, if not more, and was the immediate cause of death. Independently of the wounds described, there were several of smaller character, one of which divided the left ear. Could not have been self-inflicted. In answer to the juryman whether the wounds on the forehead could have been stunned the deceased, the answer in the affirmative. In reply to further questions, the witness said that the wounds could not have been inflicted by herself. The instrument with which the wounds were inflicted was, in his opinion, a heavy and a sharp one, and the person who inflicted them must have been a strong man. The wounds might have been inflicted with a large sword, the wound on the forehead with a hatchet, but it was impossible to come to any decisive opinion as to the nature of the instrument. Here some of the jury said that a strict search should be made for the instrument with which the wounds were afflicted, as none had as yet been discovered on the premises. As the inquest continued, neighbours and bystanders added their fragments to the puzzle. Some described Catherine's quiet last errand for half a pint of porter, others spoke of strangers loitering in the streets. Yet, tellingly, not a single ear in adjoining houses heard a struggle or cry for help on the fateful night. No noise or struggling. Mrs. Sarah Scarlett, wife of the landlord of the Wellesley Arms, said that the deceased came to the house on the Thursday before the discovery of the murder for a half pint of porter. It was about 10 o'clock in the evening. Deceased was not in the habit of coming to the house of an evening, but on that occasion she bought a small mug in which the porter was put, and she paid a penny for it and then went away. James Hunt, the pot boy at the Wellesley Arms, said he saw two strange men in Wellesley Street on Thursday night, May the 2nd, at about 8:30, and they acted in what appeared to him to be a suspicious manner. One walked down the street towards the King's Road, and the other remained in the place where he first saw him. A short time after, again, he saw the two men together, and again they separated. Mr. Platel, who lived at number 18 Wellesley Street next door to the deceased, said he was alone from 9:30 till 10:30 on Thursday evening, and he heard no noise or struggling in the deceased's house. As the inquest unfolded, attention soon circled back to the lodger. Neighbours had already whispered about her curious composure on the day of the discovery, and now the courtroom saw it for themselves. Though Mrs. Mortimer had claimed beforehand she might faint at the sight of her neighbour's mangled body, she showed no such distress when finally confronted with the scene. She stepped into the blood-darkened room, calmly uttered, "Poor thing, poor thing," and even watched while the corpse was moved and loose teeth gathered, all without the tremor of shock expected of a Georgian gentlewoman faced with such brutality. Her steady voice and almost clinical self-possession puzzled the jury and deepened the cloud of suspicion that had settled over her. Evinced no kind of terror. Mr. Ennius MacDonald, a barrister, deposed that upon his return home to dinner on the day in question, he was apprised of the murder and immediately went to the house, where he saw several persons, and amongst them Mrs. Mortimer, who appeared much confused and who said that the parlour was the room which she usually occupied in the house. The witness added that he looked about the house to try and discover such an instrument as that with which the murder was perpetrated, but he failed to find anything, no chopper or large knife, such as families use in cutting up meat, being in the house. When conversing on the subject of the murder, a witness heard Mrs. Mortimer express a dread of fainting if she saw the corpse. She also said that the deceased and she were on such intimate terms, and that such a community of feeling existed between them, that they were in the habit of using each other's things indiscriminately. When Mrs. Mortimer entered the room where the deceased was lying, she evinced much self-possession, merely saying, "Poor thing, poor thing." She saw the body move and the teeth found on the hearthrug, but evinced no kind of terror. Pressed for details, Mrs. Mortimer offered a steady stream of answers. She explained that she had lodged with Catherine for 4 months, but had been staying with family in Battersea for the past 3 weeks. On the Saturday of the discovery, she had only come to Chelsea to shop, and had heard, she said, that Catherine's goods were being seized, which prompted her to visit to Wellesley Street. She confirmed that Catherine seldom entertained visitors, and mostly female ones at that, and admitted that the older woman had borrowed her street door key after mislaying her own. Although the coroner probed rumours of hidden wealth, Mrs. Mortimer insisted that Catherine lived in poverty and had no secret fortune to tempt a thief. Finally, Mrs. Mortimer herself, who now gave her true name as Mary Ann Eastman, aged 29, set out a careful account of her movement. She said she had left Catherine well on Wednesday morning, then spent the following days shuttling between her grieving sister's home in Battersea and her brother's, James Eastman's, house, even taking a Thursday evening walk with her father. Her brother confirmed every time and detail, providing a solid alibi that placed her far from Wellesley Street on the night of the murder. The coroner sums up: atrocious crime enveloped in darkness. The coroner observed that a most atrocious crime had been committed, but unfortunately it was enveloped in darkness. It was impossible to recollect the appearance which the body of the poor woman presented when lifted from the ground without feelings of horror. He never saw a poor creature so mangled in his life. There could be no doubt that a deliberate and wilful murder had been committed, but the evidence did not, in his opinion, involve any person in the transaction. The jury had heard the evidence, and he had no doubt that they would return a verdict which would be satisfactory to themselves and the country. If they returned a verdict of wilful murder against some person or persons unknown, it would have the effect of causing further inquiry, and he hoped a liberal reward would be offered to induce persons to persevere in discovering the murderers. It would have been very satisfactory if they had discovered the way in which the murderers entered the house. It did not appear that they resorted to violence to effect an entrance, and it was doubtful, therefore, whether they followed the deceased in with her beer, or whether they had remained any time in the house before they committed the murder. After the coroner had concluded, the jury said they would like to hear the evidence of the police officer who came on duty at 9 o'clock in Wellesley Street after the other officer had left. With the evidence exhausted and no suspect in sight, the jury hesitated to close their books. But before delivering a verdict, they pressed for anything more, any fresh testimony that might pierce the darkness. At their urging, additional police witnesses and neighbours were summoned, in the faint hope of unearthing a clue that had somehow been overlooked. Potboy's story corroborated. William Lyons, Police Constable V161, deposed that he was on duty in Wellesley Street at 9 o'clock on Thursday, May the 4th, corroborating the potboy, James Hunt, respecting the two men who were in the street at about 10 p.m. He said he saw the two men at the corner of Wellesley Street, and as they remained there some time, he asked them if they were watching a grave, as it was a common occurrence for graves to be watched at night owing to the fear of body snatchers. He said that the two men replied that they were waiting for a friend who lived in the corner house, and as the witness knew that an exciseman lived there, he thought they wanted to give some information respecting some smuggled goods. Witness said that, when speaking to these men, he had his lantern before him and under his cloak, and therefore supposed that the potboy Hunt must have passed when he was speaking to the men. The father of the witness, Mrs. Mortimer, was called and corroborated her statement about having had a walk with him on Thursday night from about 8:30 till nearly 10 o'clock. Police constable gives evidence. Police constable Charles Hayward Hughes deposed to having found a piece of old broken sword in the room occupied by the deceased. It was very clear that this could not have been the weapon with which the deceased had been murdered. Police Constable John King said that he too had discovered a piece of broken sword about 18 inches long behind a chest of drawers in the bedchamber of the deceased, but that this, it was proved, could not have been the weapon with which the deed had been committed. 13 witnesses were called, in addition to those already mentioned, but they only deposed to the sober and regular habits of the deceased, to the character of one or two against whom suspicion had been entertained, and to sundry matters connected with the affairs of the unfortunate victim, which had only an indirect bearing on the case. In the end, the jury could do little more than name the crime itself. Their verdict: willful murder by person or persons unknown. A handsome reward of £100, a sum worth around £15,000 today, was swiftly posted, its promise meant to loosen the tongues and lure the culprit into the light. But no one ever came forward, no arrest was made. And so the Chelsea flat murder slipped into history unsolved. A locked room riddle, steeped in silence, its killer lost to the shadows of time. The case remains as cold today as the morning that it was discovered. Further particulars. And now, having tiptoed through blood-spattered Chelsea drawing rooms, we arrive at our customary further particulars, that cooling dish of improbable oddities to cleanse the palate. Tonight's offering drifts in from Glamorganshire, where the locals are discovering that some ghosts aren't content to merely rattle chains and sigh theatrically. Picture it: an abandoned colliery, midnight mist thick enough to butter your toast, and a figure so extravagantly skeletal it could double as a cathedral gargoyle on its night off. What happens next involves glowing eye sockets, vice-like embraces, and a grown man wrestling something that may or may not exist at all. Lock the doors, pour another cup of tea, and meet the phantom pugilist of Tondu. From the South Wales Echo, the 25th of September, 1904, London, September the 24th. The ghost of Tondu in Glamorganshire has reasserted itself in the most aggressive fashion. A respectable resident of the district in which the uncanny apparition haunts and terrorizes was proceeding at midnight along a lonely, narrow roadway adjoining the deserted buildings and coke ovens of the abandoned colliery, an ideal spot for ghosts when he was actually attacked by the unnatural monster. The gentleman is muscular, but the sight which suddenly met his gaze at the far end of a tunnel-like bridge made him turn hot and cold. An exceptionally tall, cadaverous figure was standing there, a silent, motionless sentinel. It was shrouded in white, the orthodox garb of the genuine ghost. The head, as the frightened observer now described it, was like a death's head, covered with wrinkled parchment. The eyes were hollow sockets, which there was a cavernous glow. Suddenly, the eerie thing advanced towards the trembling man under the bridge. It approached within 20 yards and then swiftly glided toward him with its long arms outstretched. It clasped him as though in a vice, and then began an uncanny tussle in the darkness. The man could not grip. There seemed nothing more tangible than air, but he felt himself held as though in the folds of a python, and the glowing sockets were bent full upon him. He turned to flee, but he could not escape from the power that held him. With a frantic effort, he clutched again at this supernatural assailant, and it was gone. Women and children creep indoors when nightfall comes, and bands of stalwart men sally forth to lay the terror of Tondu. The delivery is complete, the story is concluded. The tale, carefully packaged and sealed with due diligence, has now been received and read. For those who found this missive agreeable and worthy of further circulation, your next steps are both proper and appreciated. Like, subscribe, and share with fellow recipients, neighbours, and persons of note. Such actions ensure the safe and timely delivery of future tales, while simultaneously appeasing the inscrutable and often temperamental YouTube algorithm, a force less reliable than even the Sunday Post. Your continued patronage keeps this service running, and further deliveries shall commence at the next appointed hour. And should you feel moved to go beyond mere liking and subscribing, to step inside the private parlour where the lights burn late and the archives go deeper, you may present your calling card at Patreon. There, patrons receive every investigation ad-free, early, and entirely unabridged, together with assorted curiosities not fit for public dispatch. It is, in short, the most civilized way to keep this enterprise solvent, and the YouTube algorithm from growing peevish. Your support is both the ink in the pen and the oil in the lantern. Proceed, if you will, to the private entrance. News of the Times, Historical Crime, at patreon.com. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, professional lurker in pea supers and the sole proprietor of Coles & Co. Emergency Cravat Defoggers